Man finds Lioness begging for help to save her cub. His next move will give you goosebumps. The African sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when wildlife photographer Marcus Chen noticed something unusual. He had been tracking a pride of lions through the Maasai Mara for 3 days, documenting their behavior for a National Geographic assignment. What he witnessed next would challenge everything he thought he knew about the relationship between humans and wild animals. Marcus had positioned himself behind a cluster of acacia trees, his telephoto lens focused on the pride resting in the shade about 200 meters away. The afternoon heat was intense, and most of the lions were conserving energy, sprawled lazily on the grass. But one lioness caught his attention. She was pacing restlessly, her golden coat catching the light as she moved back and forth with obvious distress. "Something's not right," Marcus muttered to himself, adjusting his camera settings to capture the lioness's agitated behavior. Through his viewfinder, he could see her stopping every few steps to look toward a rocky outcropping about half a kilometer away, then back toward the pride, then toward the rocks again. If you're enjoying this incredible true story of wildlife rescue, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. We share amazing animal stories like this every week, and your support helps us bring you more content about the incredible bond between humans and wildlife. Now, let's continue with this heart-stopping encounter. The lioness, whom Marcus would later learn was named Casey by local Maasai guides, was clearly in distress. Her maternal instincts were on high alert, and Marcus began to piece together what might be happening. As a seasoned wildlife photographer with over 15 years of experience in Africa, he had seen this behavior before, a mother separated from her young. Marcus carefully repositioned himself, moving slowly and deliberately to avoid startling the pride. He knew that approaching lions, even distressed ones, required extreme caution and respect for their space. Using his binoculars, he scanned the rocky outcropping where the lioness kept looking. That's when he spotted it, a small, golden form wedged between two large boulders. The cub appeared to be stuck, its tiny body visible but clearly unable to free itself from the narrow gap between the rocks. Marcus estimated the cub to be about 3 months old, still heavily dependent on its mother. The distance between the trapped cub and the pride was significant. Too far for the lioness to maintain visual contact while staying with her other cubs and the pride. As Marcus watched through his telephoto lens, the lioness made several attempts to approach the rocky area where her cub was trapped. Each time, she would take a few steps in that direction, look back at the pride, then return. Her body language spoke volumes. She was torn between her responsibility to her other cubs and the pack, and her desperate need to rescue the trapped youngster. The situation became more complex as Marcus noticed the behavior of the other lions. The dominant male, a magnificent specimen with a dark mane, occasionally lifted his head to observe the lioness's distress, but showed no intention of moving from his resting spot. The other lionesses in the pride seemed aware of the situation, but were focused on their own cubs, who were playing and nursing nearby. Marcus realized he was witnessing a critical moment in the wild. Nature rarely provides easy solutions to such dilemmas, and intervention by humans in wildlife situations is typically discouraged. However, something about this particular scene compelled him to observe more closely. As the afternoon wore on, the lioness's distress became increasingly apparent. She began to vocalize, soft, chuffing sounds that Marcus recognized as maternal calls meant to comfort her distant cub. Occasionally, he could hear a faint response from the direction of the rocks, confirming that the cub was alive but still trapped. The turning point came when the lioness did something that Marcus had never witnessed in all his years of wildlife observation. She began to move deliberately toward his position, stopping about 50 meters away from where he was concealed behind the acacia trees. Her posture was not aggressive. Instead, she sat down and began to vocalize more loudly, alternating her gaze between Marcus's location and the rocky outcropping where her cub was trapped. "She knows I'm here," Marcus whispered to himself, his camera forgotten for a moment as he tried to process what was happening. The lioness's behavior was unprecedented in his experience. She wasn't displaying territorial aggression or protective posturing. Instead, her body language seemed almost pleading. For several minutes, the lioness maintained this position, occasionally standing and taking a few steps toward the rocks, then returning to her spot near Marcus's hiding place. Her vocalizations continued, a mix of calls directed toward her trapped cub and what seemed like attempts to communicate with the human she clearly knew was watching. Marcus found himself in an extraordinary situation. As a professional wildlife photographer, he adhered to strict ethical guidelines about non-interference with natural processes. Photographers and researchers are trained to observe and document, not to intervene in wildlife situations. The natural world operates on its own terms, and human interference often creates more problems than it solves. However, this situation felt different. The lioness's behavior suggested a level of intelligence and desperation that transcended typical animal-human interactions. Marcus began to consider his options, weighing the ethical implications against the immediate crisis facing this mother and her cub. Using his satellite phone, Marcus contacted the local Kenya Wildlife Service station. He spoke with James Kimani, a senior ranger he had worked with on previous assignments. After describing the situation, James agreed to dispatch a team to assess the circumstances. However, the nearest KWS station was 3 hours away, and the approaching darkness would make a nighttime rescue extremely dangerous for both humans and animals. "The priority is safety for everyone involved," James explained over the radio. "If the cub has survived this long, it might make it through the night. We'll arrive at first light with proper equipment and veterinary support." But as the sun continued its descent, the lioness's behavior became increasingly desperate. She began to make more frequent trips toward Marcus's position, each time stopping just outside what appeared to be her comfort zone for human proximity, about 30 meters away. Her vocalizations intensified, and Marcus could see her looking directly at him with what he could only describe as intentional eye contact. The ethical dilemma weighed heavily on Marcus's mind. On one hand, interfering with natural processes went against everything he had been taught about wildlife observation. On the other hand, he was witnessing what appeared to be a direct appeal for help from an intelligent wild animal. The lioness seemed to understand that the human watching her had capabilities that she did not, the ability to manipulate objects, use tools, and potentially free her trapped cub. As darkness began to fall, Marcus made a decision that would stay with him for the rest of his life. He carefully packed his camera equipment and began to slowly approach the lioness, speaking in calm, low tones as he moved. The lioness watched his approach without retreating, her body language remaining non-aggressive but alert. "Easy, girl," Marcus said softly, maintaining eye contact but avoiding direct confrontation postures. "I understand what you're asking. Let's see if we can help your baby." The lioness stood as Marcus approached, but did not retreat. Instead, she began to move slowly toward the rocky outcropping, occasionally looking back as if to ensure Marcus was following. This behavior, leading a human toward a specific location, was remarkable and unprecedented in Marcus's experience with wild lions. The journey to the trapped cub took about 20 minutes, with Marcus maintaining a respectful distance of about 10 meters behind the lioness. She moved with purpose, occasionally stopping to vocalize toward the rocks ahead. As they approached the location, Marcus could hear the cub's responding calls, weak but consistent. The sight that greeted Marcus at the rocky outcropping was both heartbreaking and inspiring. The cub, appearing exhausted and dehydrated, was wedged between two large granite boulders. The gap was wide enough for the small lion to have entered, possibly while playing or exploring, but the angle and positioning made it impossible for the cub to back out or turn around. The lioness immediately approached the rocks and began trying to reach her cub, extending her paws into the gap and vocalizing reassuringly. The cub responded with weak but persistent calls, clearly recognizing its mother's presence. However, the lioness's efforts, while emotionally powerful to witness, were physically insufficient to solve the problem. Marcus assessed the situation carefully. The rocks were heavy but appeared to be naturally positioned rather than permanently fixed. With the right leverage and approach, it might be possible to create enough space for the cub to escape. However, any such attempt would require working in very close proximity to a wild lioness, a scenario that would typically be considered extremely dangerous. What happened next amazed Marcus. The lioness seemed to understand that her presence near the rocks might interfere with any rescue attempt. She deliberately moved several meters away and sat down, maintaining visual contact but providing Marcus with clear access to the trapped cub. "You're really asking me to do this, aren't you?" Marcus said quietly, more to himself than to the lioness. "All right, let's see what we can do." Marcus approached the rocks carefully, speaking in soothing tones to both the mother and the trapped cub. The young lion's eyes were bright and alert, and Marcus could see no obvious signs of injury beyond exhaustion and dehydration. The cub watched Marcus with curiosity rather than fear, perhaps recognizing that this strange creature represented its best chance for freedom. The rescue operation required both physical strength and careful planning. Marcus identified a smaller rock that, if moved, might create enough space for the cub to maneuver. Using a fallen branch as a lever, he began to work at shifting the stone's position. The process was slow and methodical, with Marcus constantly aware of the lioness watching his every move. After nearly 30 minutes of careful work, Marcus succeeded in creating enough space for the cub to turn around within the gap. However, the young lion was clearly weakened by its ordeal and seemed uncertain about how to proceed. Marcus found himself in the surreal position of verbally encouraging a wild lion cub, using the same gentle tones he might use with a domestic pet. "Come on, little one," he said softly. "Your mama's waiting for you. Just turn around and back out slowly." The breakthrough came when the lioness began to call to her cub from her position several meters away. The sound of its mother's voice seemed to energize the young lion, and it began to slowly work its way backward through the gap Marcus had widened. The process took several tense minutes, with Marcus ready to retreat quickly if the situation became dangerous. Finally, the cub emerged from the rocky trap, stumbling slightly as it regained its footing on solid ground. The reunion between mother and cub was immediate and emotional. The lioness rushed to her offspring, nuzzling and licking the young lion while vocalizing what Marcus could only interpret as relief and joy. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary part of this entire experience. After ensuring her cub was unharmed, the lioness approached Marcus to within about 3 meters, closer than any wild lion had ever come to him in 15 years of wildlife photography. She maintained eye contact for several long moments, and Marcus felt an unmistakable sense of communication passing between them. "You're welcome," Marcus said quietly, understanding that he was likely anthropomorphizing the interaction, but feeling nonetheless that some form of gratitude was being expressed. The lioness then did something that Marcus would later describe as the most moving wildlife encounter of his career. She gently picked up her cub by the scruff of the neck and carried it a few steps toward Marcus before setting it down. The cub, now recovered enough to be curious, looked directly at Marcus with bright, alert eyes. For a brief moment, the three beings, human, lioness, and cub, shared a space of mutual understanding and respect that transcended the usual boundaries between species. Marcus carefully reached for his camera, not to document the rescue, but to capture this moment of connection that he knew would never come again. The lioness allowed Marcus to photograph her and the cub for several minutes before beginning to move away from the rocky area. She carried her cub gently in her mouth, moving slowly to accommodate the young lion's weakened condition. Before disappearing into the gathering darkness, she stopped one final time and looked back at Marcus, a moment he would remember for the rest of his life. The journey back to his vehicle was surreal for Marcus. He had just participated in what could only be described as an interspecies collaboration, working with a wild lioness to rescue her cub. The ethical implications of his intervention would be debated by colleagues and wildlife experts, but Marcus felt no regret about his decision to help. The following morning, the Kenya Wildlife Service team arrived as promised. James Kimani and his colleagues were amazed by Marcus's account of the previous evening's events. They conducted a thorough search of the area and found evidence supporting Marcus's story: disturbed rocks at the rescue site and tracks showing the lioness and cub rejoining the pride during the night. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, the veterinarian accompanying the KWS team, examined the site and agreed that Marcus's intervention had likely saved the cub's life. Dehydration and exposure would have been fatal within another 12 to 18 hours, she explained. The lioness knew her cub was in mortal danger, and her behavior suggests she understood that you represented her best chance for help. The story of Marcus's encounter with the lioness and her trapped cub spread quickly through the wildlife research community. While some criticized his decision to intervene, many respected researchers praised both his careful approach and the remarkable intelligence displayed by the lioness in seeking human assistance. Dr. Kevin Richardson, known worldwide for his work with lions, commented on the story. This account highlights the remarkable intelligence and emotional depth of lions that many people don't recognize. The lioness's behavior suggests a level of problem-solving and communication that challenges our assumptions about animal cognition. Marcus returned to the same area 6 months later for a follow-up assignment. Working with local Maasai guides, he was able to locate the same pride and, remarkably, the same lioness and her cub, now a healthy, growing juvenile. The young lion showed no fear of Marcus's presence, while the lioness acknowledged him with what appeared to be recognition before continuing with her normal activities. The ethical questions raised by this encounter continue to generate discussion among wildlife professionals. The general principle of non-interference in natural processes remains important for maintaining ecosystem balance and preventing dangerous precedents. However, Marcus's experience demonstrates that exceptional circumstances may sometimes call for exceptional responses. The photographs Marcus captured of the rescue and the subsequent reunion became some of his most celebrated work, not just for their technical excellence, but for the story they tell about the complex relationship between humans and wildlife. The images have been featured in exhibitions around the world, always accompanied by Marcus's detailed account of the rescue and the ethical considerations it raised. Today, Marcus continues his work as a wildlife photographer, but the encounter with the lioness and her cub has profoundly influenced his approach to his craft. He speaks frequently about the intelligence and emotional complexity of wildlife, using his experience as an example of the deep connections that can exist between species when approached with respect and understanding. That lioness taught me that the line between human and animal intelligence is far less clear than we often assume, Marcus reflects. She identified a problem, developed a solution that involved seeking help from another species, and successfully communicated her need. That level of cognitive complexity and problem-solving ability challenges many of our assumptions about animal consciousness. The rescue also highlighted the importance of wildlife conservation efforts in Kenya and across Africa. As human populations expand and encroach on traditional wildlife habitats, encounters between people and animals become more frequent. Marcus's experience demonstrates that these interactions don't always have to end in conflict. With proper knowledge, respect, and caution, humans and wildlife can sometimes find ways to coexist and even help one another. The Kenya Wildlife Service has used Marcus's story as part of their community outreach programs, teaching local populations about wildlife behavior and appropriate responses to encounters with dangerous animals. James Kimani notes that the story has helped change attitudes in some communities. People understand that wild animals are intelligent beings capable of complex emotions and problem-solving. This creates more respect and reduces conflict. For Marcus, the most lasting impact of the encounter has been personal. I realized that my role as a wildlife photographer isn't just to document what I see, but to help people understand the incredible intelligence and emotional depth of the animals we share this planet with, he explains. That lioness didn't just ask for help. She trusted me enough to work with me to save her cub. That trust is something I'll carry with me forever. The cub that was rescued that evening in the Maasai Mara has grown into a healthy adult lion, successfully integrated into the pride and contributing to the continuation of her family line. The rescue that began with a mother's desperate plea and a photographer's difficult decision has become a powerful reminder that the bonds between all living beings can transcend the boundaries we typically imagine. Marcus's story continues to inspire wildlife enthusiasts, photographers, and conservationists around the world. It serves as a testament to the remarkable intelligence of wildlife and the potential for understanding and cooperation between humans and animals when approached with respect, caution, and compassion. Most importantly, it reminds us that in a world where human-wildlife conflict is increasingly common, there are still opportunities for connection, understanding, and mutual aid between species. The photographs from that remarkable evening hang in Marcus's studio today, not just as beautiful images, but as a permanent reminder of one of the most profound experiences of his life. The lioness's trusting gaze, captured forever in those frames, continues to inspire his work and his commitment to wildlife conservation. It's a look that speaks across species barriers, a moment of understanding that proves the natural world is far more complex and beautiful than we often realize.